Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Doug Gaddis, and I'd like to announce that, unlike everyone else, I am not running for President of the United States. Mainly that's because I already have the best job in the world as Executive Director of Silver Spring Village. Every single day at work, I get to help seniors in Silver Spring lead their very best possible lives. Given the military theme and the veterans theme of today's presentation, I think it's apt to say that Silver Spring Village mobilizes an army of volunteers who are committed to supporting local seniors in their choice to remain in their homes and in their neighborhoods where they can flourish. Our work focuses on two primary areas: providing opportunities for continued social and intellectual stimulation through more than 700 annual events such as this one, and direct services that make aging a little easier and a little safer. Things like light home repairs, friendly visits and phone calls, rides to medical and other important appointments, grocery shopping and errands, medical note-taking, and much, much more. Altogether, in addition to these 700 annual events, we provide more than 2,200 of these services each year. On your chairs, you'll find information about Silver Spring Village, and we encourage you to join us as a member or as a volunteer. We don't have an age limit, so everyone is welcome. I am not quite a senior. I sometimes refer to myself as a senior in waiting, but I'm a member. We also have an information table outside the door, and anyone would be happy to provide additional information about our work. I'd like to thank several people who've helped make today's presentation possible. Today's event is a series of a monthly Sparkle presentations that we co-present with Silver Spring Town Center. Ordinarily, we have a couple dozen attendees, and looking around, I think I can say that we outdid ourselves this time. And we ran out of space in the room, so we had to move to a larger room, and I would like to thank Dr. Odile Brunetto and Pazit Aviv from the county's Department of Health and Human Services, Aging and Disability Services, and Betsy Luking from the Montgomery County Commission on Veterans Affairs for their assistance. In fact, they were instrumental in getting this facility for us today. Buzz 365 Media is not only providing the video feed that you see on the screen, but they are also live streaming and archiving this presentation. So in fact, audiences around the globe will be able to hear General McGee's fascinating story. I'd also like to thank Doug McDaniel, the associate publisher of Montgomery Magazine, who originally put me in touch with General McGee last fall when he was still a young whippersnapper of 99, and before he became famous for coin flipping and State of the Unioning and all that other stuff. And also my good friend, the Reverend Dr. Timothy Tutt, who is senior minister at Westmoreland Congregational United Church of Christ in Bethesda, has generously volunteered his time today to facilitate the conversation. And we have several special guests, and I would invite them to stand together to be recognized. We have representatives from the offices of Senator Ben Cardin, Senator Chris Van Hollen, Congressman Jamie Raskin. Also, we have Congressman John Sarbanes. From the Montgomery County Council, we have Council Member Will Jawando and Council Member Hans Riemer. You can applaud. These are good people. And finally, it's important to remember during Black History Month that African Americans have fought the fight for democracy, inclusion, and justice in every war since the American Revolution. We're telling General McGee's story today, but the background is far more expansive. You may have noticed when you entered the display in the lobby honoring some of Montgomery County's African American veterans. And I understand that some of the people featured and some of their family members are present today. So I would invite them, along with Dan Bullis and Wayne Miller, the chair and vice chair of the Montgomery County Commission on Veterans Affairs, to stand and be recognized with a round of applause that expresses our gratitude and respect. And lastly, I will stop boring you, and I will turn it over to Lisa Martin, the executive director of our co-presenting organization, Silver Spring Town Center.
Thank you so much, Doug, and welcome everyone on behalf of Silver Spring Town Center and our board of directors. We're so happy to have such a huge sparkle turnout. We're so honored to have General McGee here. First, he was at the Super Bowl coin toss. He did the Super Bowl coin toss. He was honored at the State of the Union, and now he's in downtown Silver Spring with us. So we are thrilled and honored to have you here, sir, and thank you for your service and the service of all of our veterans. We're especially grateful to have a relationship with Montgomery County Commission on Veterans Affairs. Silver Spring Town Center presents an annual veterans concert in November, and we couldn't do it without their support. We have many veterans in the house. Thank you all for your service. We are also honoring Black History Month this month. And we have this event included under that umbrella, as well as next Wednesday we have a special film and lecture series event about America's first Black diplomat, Ebenezer Bassett. So that's a film and lecture series event next Wednesday. And then on Thursday evening we have our art salon with a spotlight on African American arts. And so be sure to get one of our programs. Silver Spring Town Center presents over 100 free arts and entertainment events, including the Veterans Concert and Blues Festival, and our monthly Sparkle program in collaboration with Silver Spring Village. And as you know, Sparkle stands for Senior Programs Aimed at Rekindling Lifetime Engagement. So we are thrilled. It should be noted, too, that this is double the size of our largest ever Sparkle. So it's because so many people in our community love General McGee and are thrilled to hear your inspiring story. So enjoy. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Tim Tutt. I'm the senior minister at Westmoreland Congregational United Church of Christ in Bethesda. And in a moment, I will have the privilege and opportunity to invite us all into a conversation with the general. We're going to be seated there in a moment. But a couple of logistical notes beforehand. If you would please silence anything that rings or beeps or chirps or tweets, that would be great. Even if you think it's already silenced, now would be a good time to check your phone or other device. The second thing is after our conversation, you'll have a chance to visit with General McGee. We'd invite you to keep that rather brief, perhaps a photo. If you have a book to sign, that's excellent. This is not the time for you to share with him your dissertation on American history. You can do that at your own convenience. I was asked to say that, by the way. I would let you all stay all day, right? It's not me. As Doug said, Brigadier General Charles McGee turned 100 years old this past December, just 10 weeks ago. As we enter into this conversation with him about his life and work, we want to sort of set the stage for what things were like when he came into the world. In his first 10 weeks of life, there were only 68 countries in the world. The Treaty of Versailles had just ended what was then called the Great War, or the War to End All Wars. A young batter named Babe Ruth had just been traded to the New York Yankees, and prohibition had turned the country dry. General McGee was born only 16 years after the very first flight at Kitty Hawk, so powered flight was still in its infancy as he was. Just want to set the stage by helping us remember what he has seen in his life and how our country and the world have unfolded in both strange and awful and wonderful ways. It's also fitting today that we're gathered in this room that is called the Buffalo Soldiers Great Hall. I think we need to pause and honor that. Buffalo Soldiers was the name given to the first all-black cavalry and infantry regiments organized in the United States Army following the Civil War. Those regiments were largely assigned to the vast territories of the American West, where buffalo roamed at the time. And then they remained segregated, and then in the middle of World War II, or as World War II was beginning, the Tuskegee Airmen came into being in that same segregated fashion. Both groups remained segregated until 1948, when President Truman issued an executive order reminding us that military service was open to all, regardless of race or color. The excellence and the bravery of the Tuskegee Airmen made the undeniable argument to us, the American people, that African Americans were brave and had both the privilege and the responsibility and were as qualified as anyone else to serve their country, even at a time when their country did not serve them. And so today, we honor that great history. I would like to invite Councilmember Jawando to join me in presenting a proclamation. And General McGee, if you would join us. This proclamation is actually signed by the county executive, Mark Elrich, but it comes from the entire county. And so if you would like to read that, Councilmember.
Happy to do it, and good to see you. Point of personal privilege, both General McGee and I are in the same best fraternity in the world, Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. And I see Dr. Coots here as well, and we've got, along with Martin Luther King and Thurgood Marshall, a long list of Charles Hamilton Houston. The list goes on and on. So I'm honored. We actually are in the same chapter now, in the Silver Spring chapter, which played a huge role in building the monument for Martin Luther King on the mall. And so I just always have to say that when I'm with him, and it's an honor to be with you again. This proclamation is on behalf of all of us who have the honor and privilege of serving Montgomery County. Whereas Brigadier General Charles E. McGee, as a member of the Tuskegee Airmen, stood at the forefront of efforts to integrate the U.S. Army Air Corps, and whereas General McGee served the United States faithfully and valiantly in 409 aerial combat missions in World War II, the Korean War, and the Vietnam War. And whereas General McGee, at the young age of 100 years, has recently been promoted to the rank of Brigadier General, United States Air Force, and whereas General McGee enthusiastically serves as a role model and generously gives of his time to educate and inspire audiences. Now, therefore, do we resolve, I'm going to ad-lib here, Mark Elrich as County Executive and all of the County Council. We're going to honor him later this month at the County Council. Applaud General McGee's commitment in service to our country and to our county, now that you're a resident. Thank you, sir, very much. Let's give him a big round of applause.
So you make yourself at home there. You've got a bottle of water and a microphone. We can stay all day, right?
And ready. So I'd like to, before any questions come, whether from you or the audience, to indicate that that first picture said the oldest of the Tuskegee Airmen. That needs just a little correction. Oldest of the 355 pilots that got overseas. I'm the oldest, the youngest is 94. I say that because hopefully when we get through talking, folks will understand there are 5 phases to the Tuskegee experience, and the pilots are a small part of that experience. Folks, it took some 14,000 or so support people to make it possible for what we pilots did. So we need to give them a hand, and they're a part of that. Thank you. The program produced a little over 900 pilots, but as I say, only 355 got overseas. Part of the Tuskegee Airmen pilots were preparing to go to the Pacific, but they dropped that big bomb and their training ended. They didn't make it, but they did play a part in what the experience was all about, and we'll be glad to talk about that.
Why don't you talk about that a bit? And let me put it in this context. One of the things, as I've watched you at the coin toss and State of the Union and read about you lately, is you're described as a hero. And undeniably, you are a hero, and we thank you for that. And I'm curious, sort of theoretically and personally from you, what do you think of when someone just uses the word hero? Maybe who are some of your heroes? And I have a feeling you're going to say these 9,000 crew members, but then also, what does it feel like to you at age 100 when someone says, hey, you're a hero? So start with that, and then maybe work your way back into the Tuskegee Airman experience.
Well, I personally don't see myself as a hero. To me, that honor should go to those who gave full measure and are no longer with us. It's hard to put that into context. We accomplished something that was good for the country, and if that's part of why you call folks heroes, well, we can listen, but that I don't stand tall for that. I stand tall for what our country stands for, and for the fact that we had the opportunity to serve in a way, and for some folks may not know that why and how the Tuskegee Airmen came about. In 1925, the Army War College did a study, and the subject was use of Negro manpower if America gets involved in another war. Paragraph 4 on the first page, it's a 4-page report. Paragraph 4 on the first page says, facts bearing on the problem. The Negro is physically qualified. The Negro is mentally inferior to the white man. The Negro does not have the willpower of the white man, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Therefore, considering them and doing something in technology like maintaining and flying an aircraft, impossible. What's interesting to me, though, in that study, they didn't include the American black that went to France and were highly decorated and performed well. They didn't include the story of Bessie Coleman, who in 1920, because she was black, had to go to France to learn to fly. But she went around the country for several years, holding up this new industry of aviation for everybody, not just blacks. And that's interesting. But to me, what is more interesting, perhaps, as we look at history and realize where we've come from, and one of our earlier presidents, if you don't know where you've come from, you don't know where you're going. Well, I guess the best way to put it is they've studied the issue. They know it won't be successful. We could dig ditches, cook food, build roads, so on. Fly airplanes, no. Of course, it's interesting, when our country declared war in the late 30s to support our allies in Europe, the country was coming out of 10 years of depression. It didn't change segregation, but it did provide opportunity. Those to enlist, to help in the war industry, the war build-up, to take part of what was taking place. That support grew, and that's why finally, and I say finally, but also we're at an election time now, and I think you all know what
Are
that
we really?
means.
An election time? No one told us. No.
That the president wanted a few votes, and so he listened to those who sang, we want to serve, and for those who sang that everybody should have a part of what's taking place, and pressured the Army, and the Army said, we studied the issue. No, it won't be successful, but we'll experiment. We'll authorize a squadron at that time, 34 pilots, 24 aircraft, takes for those aircraft, the mechanics of all of the skills to maintain, that's a couple hundred technicians, if you will, and for segregation, still needed medical supply, administration, so on. That's another couple hundred folks. But part of the Army policy had been, well, in 1939, they started the civilian pilot training program at colleges around the country to provide a build-up that our military could call on as they built their units up. Tuskegee Institute in Alabama had a very successful civilian pilot training program. But in fact, I think it was here in Washington, D.C., a graduate from university said, went next door, and I want to be an Army pilot. And the Army said, we can't use a black pilot. We don't have any black mechanics. The facts of the story are, of the now called Tuskegee Airmen, the first were mechanics trained at Chanute Field Technical School, Rantoul, Illinois, expected to fail. They were given tests, and when the white leadership, they couldn't believe that they made those good scores and had them tested again. They were successful. The Army said, my goodness, we need an airfield. Airfields all around the country, but they found several $1 million to build a separate airfield, and they located that airfield 7 miles northwest of Tuskegee Institute in Alabama. Well, that may have been picked, they said, for nice weather. But I'm sure you can read something else into it as well. But the mechanics finished up, went south. The pilot training for this experiment, 99 Pursuit Squadron, began in 1941. The unit received their training, combat ready in December of 42. Army had a problem. No wire commander wants them. So they were continued in training for another 4 months or so before being sent to North Africa attached to the 33rd Fighter Group. Colonel Momeyer didn't want them. They went to their own base. So segregation went overseas under Army policy. And they sent a pilot over to 33rd's location, got their briefing, their mission information, so on. A few months later, Momeyer, still not wanting them, said, they ought to be patrolling Liberia. How many of you learned? What did you learn in school? Where's Liberia? Where were the Germans? In North Africa? I think you get the idea. Get out of my sight, because there were no Germans in Liberia at that time. But that brought a hearing here in Washington, study, so their 99's bombs on target equal to the other units. Haven't been there very long, stay. So they moved out of North Africa, in Sicily, out of Sicily, into Italy. And looking at history, and I'd say, when they moved into Italy, there was a little integration, not by the Army, but Colonel Bates was just glad to have more pilots, more aircraft to do the job, and over the Anzio beachhead, which was established to cut off the German retreat up the Italian peninsula, 99th pilots shot down more than a dozen German aircraft in a few days' time. So it was a matter of opportunity. Now, their story is phase one of what I now call the total Tuskegee experience. Phase two would be what followed. They needed replacements. Single engine fighter pilot training continued at Tuskegee, but 3 additional fighter squadrons, the 100th, the 301st, and 302nd, with all of their support, were also trained. They were combat ready, flying the P-40, which was the tactical aircraft for interdiction and ground support of that day. And they said to those of us in the 332nd Fighter Group, oh, you are going to do some patrol work. We were switched to the P-39 Bel Air Cobra. And the group went directly to Italy at the same time the 99th was moving out of Sicily into Italy. So here we are patrolling the waterways from Naples Harbor up to the Anzio beachhead, what they're doing. Well, you know, they thought we had enough guns on our B-17s and B-24s to protect the planes destroying Germany's war-making potential, but protecting them. That wasn't the case. Sometime half of a squadron was lost. For a bomber squadron, they probably say if they put up 12 aircraft, 6 not returning, that's 10 American lives lost in each. So all of the activity was under the 12th Tactical Air Force. 15th Strategic Air Force was where bombers. They pulled 4 squadrons from the 12th Air Force to begin escorting our B-17s and B-24s with the goal, save American lives. 332nd Fighter Group was one of the four groups picked to move. We moved from the Naples area of Italy to the Adriatic side. The bombers were out of North Africa flying from bases in southern Italy. And the escort work came. Now I'd like to say a word about why the red tails. It's very interesting. Of course, if you want the service story, it is, somebody had the trim tab on the rudder painted red, and the pilot said, that's not enough paint the whole tail. That's, war story, not the truth.
Let's hear the true story then. Tell us the real story.
The real story was that someone in 15th Air Force realized that the gunners on the bombers need to know that these aircraft showing up were not German, but there for their protection and to keep the German Air Force away. One of the 4 had candy stripe, one had checkerboard, one had a yellow tail, 332nd Fighter Group, the red tail. Because of the work and the leadership the 332nd had under Ben Davis, who had wanted to fly when he graduated from West Point in 36 and was told, no, we don't have any black units. He went through the first class, commanded the 99th Squadron, and they did well attached to, as I say, white groups. But in 1st of July 1944, when the group got the P-51 Mustang, we gave the P-39 to the Russia, flew P-47 for a while, and then the P-51. the 99th was assigned to the 332nd Fighter Group. So we had 4 squadrons. Most missions, each squadron put up 16 aircraft. That's on the big escort missions. Because of the leadership of BOSA, he let us young rash, as I say, second and first lieutenants know, although we would like to go happy hunting and get it, because it takes 5 kills to become an ace, and we'd like to do that. And he said, I'll court-martial the pilot that goes happy hunting. We stuck with the bombers and only were dispatched to fight them off if they attacked the bombers that we were escorting. And it ended up that BO put on his plane by request. Although most of the bomber units did not know that the Red Tails were black pilots. They knew that they didn't go happy hunting. They stayed there, and that meant safety for them. And they would, if they're getting fighters assigned, it'd be nice to have the Red Tails. But that's the experience of the 332nd Second Fighter Group. Now, as I say, that's just the second phase of the Tuskegee experience. When I graduated in June of '43, my instructor, the white instructor, because our primary training was done by black instructors with the Tuskegee Institute's program, because it's interesting. The Army was allowed to contract the primary phase of flight training to a civilian location. Tuskegee Institute applied and got the contract. And though the Army policy, blacks can't fly, and we studied, and we know it's going to fail, my instructor was a black pilot. Several. It's interesting. And as it goes, but my instructor said, it's too bad they don't have a bomber program for you guys, because I think you'd make a good bomber pilot. I didn't ask him what he meant. Because I love flying. When folks ask me how I got into aviation, I said I was avoiding the draft.
Well, tell us about that, though. I have a feeling there's more than that. I can imagine you as this young kid growing up in the Midwest or college student. How did you decide that you wanted to fly?
I was not one of those that saw airplanes and said, I want to do that someday, or had ever been around the airplane. But so that's a true story. I was avoiding the draft.
Okay.
And how did I?
Fair enough.
I was in ROTC in college, learned to handle a rifle, part of Pershing rifles, which was great. But because I was in school, my draft board wasn't pulling my number. They did occasionally, but still didn't get to me or pull my number off. Had they, I would have been on the ground in the mud with that rifle. It turns out, I mentioned that of the Tuskegee Airmen, the first were the mechanics. Rantoul was just 14 miles north of the university. And that's how I learned about the pilot program. And as I can remember, I think my ROTC instructor said, those are mechanics being trained there, you ought to be a pilot. I went and took the pilot exams and passed it, and sat back waiting to be called. So long that a young lady that I had married on campus, had met on campus, we finally decided to get married.
Now the story's getting interesting.
We decided to get married. October, on a Saturday, we got married. Monday morning's mail said report. But looking back, I think that even helped me, because she went south with me and went to work for somebody on the campus of Tuskegee Institute. But when we had a few hours off on Saturday, if I wasn't walking any tours, I didn't have to go to Montgomery or Atlanta looking for a young lady. She was there with me, so that allowed me to focus on the training. And I see that as part of that history.
So what was it like to show up in Alabama? There you and your
That was
newlywed wife were. How did that
was
feel? What
also
was that?
important because it was something to going south to get on that train, and when you cross the line, you had to move in the rail car because it had blacks up front close, and you didn't go to the dining room and that type of thing. But fortunately, we had cadets in our classes who had grown up in the South and knew what. They let us know, you don't go to this area and buy gas, or you don't kept us on the straight path for the area, because the area didn't change. and that was very helpful, because it's quite a shock, the difference of life at that time here in our country. But that's what my instructor didn't know, that they had already approved medium bomber training. And 3 months later, it began at Tuskegee. So besides training single-engine fighter pilots, it was medium bombers in the Mitchell B-25. And although the 477th Bomb Group medium brought in a lot more people, because it was all of the air crew, all the maintenance, and all of the support for them, because the Army's segregation policy still existed. But in their training, well, it was the Pittsburgh Courier newspaper, I believe, that put out one of their weekend stories, was that we were fighting for two victories: victory against Hitler in Europe, victory against racism here at home. The 477 Bomb Group had that battle here at home because Colonel Selway had General Hunter's okay to say on his base trainees could only use the facilities designated. He didn't want black pilots of the 477th going into the White Officers Club. Of course, at that time, Army had a policy, although it wasn't recognized or acted everywhere, that there should be no segregation based on race, creed, or color. The pilots of the 477th Bomb Group, 2s and 3s, peacefully wanted to go enter the White Officers Club, were denied. Of course, that upset Selway, and he called them in and said, "I'd like you to reread my regulation and sign that you will abide." 101 refused, and were immediately shipped off from Seymour, Indiana to Godman Field, Kentucky, behind barbed wire guards, all of that. Worse treatment than German prisoners of war at the adjacent Fort Knox. But that brother here, I still don't, and maybe it isn't because I have never wanted to. I don't know what they did with Selway, but the Army, I guess, knew what he was trying to do was wrong. And we're in the war ended in Europe in '45, and the 332nd Fighter Group had come home. Army had a real problem. What do we do? Oh, we'll reactivate the 99th Squadron. We'll keep 2 of the B-25 squadrons. Godman Field's too small. Oh, we'll open up Lockburn Air Base south of Columbus, Ohio. So this now the 477th Composite Group moved to Columbus, Ohio. 46, when training ended because we dropped a big bomb. Those of us that were at Tuskegee at that time, where'd we go? Lockburn Air Base, Columbus, Ohio. 1947, the air arm of our services separated from the ground forces. And although I'm sure everybody wasn't for it, but they made a determination that we need to use people based on training and experience and where needed, not their happenstance of birth. And we can't operate properly with a base that doesn't allow them, because of segregation, to assign what was needed to keep their mission going. So we need to integrate. They were backed by a very courageous president. I think some of you here remember the president that said, "The buck stops here," Harry Truman. Truman issued Executive Order 9981 mandating all the services need to integrate. Well, that's a statement, and everything takes time. So took a couple of years, but the Air Force carried out their intent by closing Lockburn Air Base the 1st of July 1949, and we were scattered around the world. Well, part of the experience that the Air Force pointed to was that of the 332nd Fighter Group, and now called the Red Tails. But I bring that up again because, as I say, the story of the Red Tails is half of the Tuskegee story. The story of the fighting segregation and what was accomplished after is another part of the story. And it turned out that when the Air Force did separate, they didn't have any use for the medium bombers for some reason. I don't know where they assigned the B-25s, but they had reactivated 332nd Fighter Group flying P-47Ns. And that brings up an interesting story. Because everybody writes their histories now. That's a big thing. They write the history. And I don't know what year it was, but some years later, the Air Force determined to write their history. And whoever was in charge of, how many have heard of Top Guns? Oh, lots of hands go up, Top Guns. When they started the history, and whoever was writing the story of the Top Guns put down 1949 unknown. Went on down the line. Guess who Top Guns, May 1949, 332nd Fighter Group flying P-47Ns.
They were the first.
It took a little time, and a researcher, a lady, finally found the trophy in the basement of the Air Force Museum. So that's another part of the story, but in short order, that's the 5 phases of the Tuskegee experience.
So let me ask you a question. We also want to ask, open it up to these folks. But so I asked you the question about being a hero. The other question that comes to my mind is about history. We talk about history as this thing. The joke is that a second ago was history too. But did you have the sense when you joined this effort, or at the moment of integrating the forces in 1948, did you have the sense that this is a moment in history? How did it feel as a young man to think, I'm living through this new moment, this change, this difficult time?
Good question, because as I look back and the friendships that I've made out of it, I don't know anybody went down to Tuskegee to say we're going to set the world on fire and we'll do something. We were just young folks glad for the opportunity, and many were those who had wanted to become an aviator and did, but also the leadership that we had. The first commander of Tuskegee Airman Airfield wasn't pushing the program. He didn't want a white person in the town of Tuskegee coming out and being met at the gate by a black with a weapon. Fortunately, he was moved. The gentleman that followed him, he didn't change segregation, but he believed in the opportunity. And that was great leadership for the time. It's that type of thing, I think, that moved all of us. An opportunity, serve our country in the way some wanted it and others. I myself, my answer is, when I took my first flight in that PT-17, I was hooked.
Yeah, I was going to ask you to tell us about your first flight. Yeah.
The only way I put it, to be able to get in a plane and go up and loop, roll, and spin and come back and put your feet on the ground, I was hooked.
Yeah.
And I can't tell you now why, how it happened, because I didn't ask for anything, but I kept getting assignments and actively flew 27 of my 30 years. What? Thank you. And maybe the only thing I can say, because I don't see too many young folks here today, but I hope all of you are mentoring some young person, because it's so important, needed today, that you do that, whether it's in the family or next door or down the street. They need it. Got to be careful in your approach, of course.
Right. That's an important word, though. Thank you.
In this day. But in looking back, and I've often asked why and how, and I just remember as little, treat other people like you want to be treated. Youngster became a Boy Scout. You know, if everybody today lived by the Scout Oath and the 12 Scout Laws, we'd have a different country completely. But you know, when you can say on my honor, well, I can give it all to you, but I won't do that. Because, and then later on, as was mentioned, I think, and was introduced to a couple of folks here, fraternal precept that to be, first of all, you can only do that if you treat those coming along behind and in a way that is meaningful for where you are, where your family is, where our country is. Those are the things that stuck with me and still need to pass on. And you know, today the technology is gone. Unfortunately, too many schools aren't letting our youngsters know it.
Right.
Yeah. I go into middle school and talk to youngsters, and I said, all of you know we're planning to go to Mars. The hands go up. And, yeah. I said, guess who's going to make the trip? I said, when it gets all planned, the planners are going to be too old. It's some youngster that's going to make that trip. And to give you a smile, my son, who's a retired airline pilot, and his high school counselor said he was going to make a good truck driver. Was talking to some youngster, and said, a little girl kept raising her hand, I want to be a nurse. And went on talking to one, said, I want to be a nurse. And he finally said, you know, they may need nurses on Mars. And boy, she lit up. Lit up. Yeah. We all have that responsibility today to monitor. There's so many things going on. Need to know from whence we've come. A lot of it we don't need to repeat, but there's so much they're not getting that they need to have, and that's something that we all need to work at passing on.
Sure. Thank you for that. So you have a room full of admirers and curious people who have questions about your life and your work. So can we open it up to some questions from these good people?
Let's do that. I don't know how if they got a microphone.
I'll walk around with the microphone. If you'll take that microphone. And earlier I mentioned that later when you have a chance to say hello, that's not the time for your dissertation. This also is not the time for your dissertation. If your question doesn't end with a question mark, it's not a question. So if you can help us with questions, at least there.
Who's got one?
General, thank you for speaking with us. Could you please provide some guidance on how people today who think that we're in a terribly racist society can really look back and say, we've come a little bit, but we have a lot farther to go. We're not as far as we think we are. How do we get further?
Well, we get further by how we act and how we pass things on to our youngsters. Few of you may know, but I pass on to youngsters what I call 4 Ps. Perceive, prepare, perform, persevere. Perceive, dream your dreams, find your talents, and I like to add, because I enjoyed my flying, find what you like to do. But prepare, get a good education. You know, they talk about STEM and that today, but learn to read, write, and speak well and develop your talents. Perform. Always do your best. Let excellence be your goal in everything that you do. And persevere. You know, we could have bowed our heads, gone off and said, they call me names, they don't like me, etc., and not served our country. What would that have accomplished? Don't let negative circumstances be an excuse for not achieving. The youngsters out there need that, and unfortunately it needs to start in some of our schools. You got school boards, you know, for a long time, I've stopped now, but going particularly high school, I'd ask, can anybody tell me what the thrust on one engine of the commercial airline 777 is? I never got an answer here at home. Guess where I got it? Top high school in Hawaii. And a lot of folks question Obama's education. That's where he got his education. To me, that's an area where anybody with children need to know what that school is doing. It's unfortunate. You got school boards with several schools under them, but their schools are not alike, and that's a tragedy. We all need to be looking at and hopefully do something about, because technology is moving ahead and our youngsters are not getting enough of it that they should have, and it's not a pretty picture in my mind as you look ahead, the differences in the schools that our youngsters are attending all across the country.
Our next question.
Thank you for your kind heart. Who would you say most influenced you in your life, and why would you pick that person?
I don't have one person that I could put my finger on. I'm just thankful for parents and grandparents that said, get your education, treat other people like you want to be treated, and sometimes my memory doesn't help me, and I can remember some history, but if you ask me the name of somebody that I shared with, unfortunately, names began to slip away. So each of us is different and may have a different look at that question. But thank you.
That was a fabulous answer. Thank you.
General, how do you see research regarding, not only research regarding from the educational perspective, but presumptive reasons regarding the veterans, their citations, their ribbons, the awards that they have already earned? How do you see the role of research regarding this?
Well, that research and education is so important. There are so many things, yet one way I would put it for everybody to look at, we human beings are one small aspect in a mighty grand universe. We need to keep that in mind. But education and understanding is so important. NASA says we're going to get a woman on the moon and go to Mars. The youngsters that are going to do that need to be applying now with the desire to face where that technology is taking us, with understanding of the need of our country if we're going to stay the #1 country in the world. These are the things that we all need to be a part of, one way or another, because every little bit adds to the whole.
I have a question. General McGee, what keeps you so vibrant at 100 years of age? I want to know your secret.
Life's been a blessing. Doesn't hurt to get on a knee and pray sometimes.
Hey, that's my line of work now.
Wow, that's so understanding where we've been, not repeating a lot of it, but knowing about it. Our youngsters need to be aware. All of us need to, and all of us need to be a part of the future of this country that we live in.
We have a question from Council Member Hans Remer.
Thank you, Lisa. General McGee, it's great to see you. Thank you for taking some time today. You've seen a lot of history in this country. I wonder, do you think that Americans are more divided today than they were when you were young, or was there more division when you were young than what you see today?
I don't know whether they're more or less of what I see, but communication is a difference. In other words, we're communicating and have access to things now that we didn't have earlier, so I can't say it wasn't the same. But again, that's the challenge to us. I've been around the world. Well, not quite, because I've never been to India, but I've been next door going west and next door going east. In all of the foreign countries that I've been in, as I've traveled and visited places and accomplished things, I was Charles for many, many years, and some of it's still going now. Coming off a boat or getting off the plane here in America, I'm black first. One of the things before she passed that my wife said in the many clubs that we shared during history, I'll be awfully glad when we go in and somebody says, "Good evening, Charles and Francis," rather than, "Glad you people are here." We each can do things without thinking that may or may not be helpful in where we ought to be going. So I'll just pass that on for you to think about. Hope that answers my question.
It's a real honor to be here with you today.
Thank you.
A few operational questions, and you can tell me to sit down at any time. You said you had 16 aircraft on a squadron. How many pilots did you have to go along with that?
How many what?
You said you had 16 aircraft in your squadrons?
Normally, on our big escort missions, each squadron put up 16 aircraft, yes.
And in wartime, how many fighter pilots did you have assigned to those squadrons?
Well, it varied because, and why, they mentioned I had 136 missions in Europe before a replacement showed up. Well, Army regulation was pulling you out of combat with 50. Again, the circumstance didn't fit, so we carried on until the replacement showed up. And I'm sure, again, they say today, we're very short of commercial pilots. Why don't we have a school training commercial pilots? You know, you're getting to something to me is our biggest problem. We've let money rule, not the need and the circumstance. We let quality go overseas for a long time. We're trying to get it back now. We're our own worst enemies when it comes to that. But the mighty dollar rules far too much rather than common sense in my mind.
General, two questions real quickly. One is, when you were in the European campaign and also Northern Africa, how were you treated in terms of your personhood at that point? Were you Charles or were you something else?
Everywhere I've been out of America, I was Charles. Not, yeah, my skin color didn't change, but it was how I acted, that was how I was treated.
This, of course, is Black History Month. I'm sorry, please go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, unfortunately, even with what we did, allowed the Air Force to make a change, it still took the civil rights action in the 60s to motels, restaurants, many things like that changed. What's still out there that needs to be changed? Well, I'm sure many of you know it, but can you do something about it, or will you, and what's the time?
Thank you. It is, of course, Black History Month. What life lessons can you pass on to us this afternoon?
I'd say to be thankful that in our lifetime and in others' lifetimes, someone comes along like Harriet Tubman, Martin Luther King. These are happenstances that help change so much that those of us just walking the street every day couldn't even think about. So it's fortunate that who's the next Martin Luther King? We don't know, or what the subject will be, but somewhere along there's kind. I think we have to be careful today with the young folks with their phone and computers. Too many are down here fiddling much too long, rather than thinking for themselves and reaching out. Some of the stuff they're getting isn't good for them, but how do you stop it? Because it's out there and there's folks taking advantage of that. There's so much that we need to be careful about and work against and things to work for.
Thank you so much, sir.
Yeah.
Let's do one more question from that side and then one more from this side. So,
General McGee, I am so proud to have been able to stand on your shoulders as I rose through the ranks in the United States Air Force. I have one simple question for you, sir. I've learned more from my challenges than from successes. What significant challenge did you face that taught you the greatest lesson as you rose through the ranks?
Well, I think what I mentioned earlier, that treating other people like you want to be treated. When I was a youngster, you got called names, there was a fight, but it didn't change a thing. Somebody went away with a bloody nose or a black eye, but it didn't change. It's the opportunity and action that brings about a change that's important in all that's going on. I hope that partially answers your question, but it's key.
Hello, General. My name is Don Baker. My twin brother and I served during the Vietnam War, but in '72, I was sent out to Baltimore to pick up a general. And I just figured, okay, it's a general. Turned out to be Chappie James. And I had a 45-minute ride with him. The second time I picked up a general was Zumwalt. And here's this young kid, not knowing the Air Force. My father was Navy, my grandfather was Army, my brother and I were Army. And I want to know, did you ever meet General Chappie James? And what was that situation like when you did?
Chappie James became a good friend. When I went through flight training, Chappie James was the instructor for Tuskegee Institute in our primary program. They wanted them to come on active duty. Most of them wanted to stay as civilians. He didn't. He went through basic, advanced, and on to become our country's first four-star general. But Chappie was an unusual person. He's what I call an all-around type of person. If you talk football, he could play any position, knew the game. If you got music, he not only sang, but he could direct or play all of the instruments. I can remember in the early 50s, we always, officers have performance reports, and they said emphasize if they're good at public speaking. Chappie was tops. He could go down on the waterfront and talk their language, or he could go in the boardroom and talk their language. There is a difference. So, again, he's the type of person, I didn't mention his, but folks like him come along every now and then and leave their mark, and he was certainly one that did. And he became a friend to the point that, unfortunately, he died a month after his retirement, but just before he had passed, I received a note from him giving me his phone number in the office he was establishing that he had hoped to serve in for a few more years.
So one final question in just a moment, but first thanks to Doug and the Silver Spring Village and others for hosting this. Thank you to the county and everyone for coordinating this. A final question. So you're 100 years old in 10 weeks, more or less, so they say. We have this new Space Force. You've mentioned going to Mars a couple of times. If they called you and said, General, we need a wise, experienced pilot to go to Mars, maybe in 6 months, they'd give you maybe 6 months, would you go?
Certainly I would go, but not with the point that I would be making the trip, but to help some of those preparing for the trip. And that I can tell you now, NASA would like young folks to apply now for astronaut training to be a part of that space future. So, again,
Am I young enough to apply if I could go with you on that trip? I don't want to go with anyone else, I don't think. But
if I say yes, I think you'll need to talk to somebody upstairs and be sure that it's a trip that you want to take.
So we started by talking about heroes. Thank you for your wisdom and your experience. And I would say that today I can put General Chappie James and you in my pantheon of heroes. And I think this room full of people would join me in saying that. So thank you for your life and for your work and for setting an example for all of us of what a true American hero is. So thank you so much.
Thank you very, very kindly. I appreciate it. Yeah.